My mission in life is not merely to survive, but to thrive, and to do so with some passion, some compassion, some humour and some style. Maya Angelou probably described the way she lived her life better than anyone else will, as she is mourned. The American author of I Know Why the Cage Bird Sings died on Wednesday, and artists, performers, even presidents vied to pay tribute. In a moment, Laura Kuenssberg is joined by the novelist Tayari Jones and the poet and author Ben Okri. First, though, here's Stephen Smith.
My life ain't heaven, but it sure ain't hell. I'm not on top, but I call it swell if I'm able to work and get paid right and have the luck to be black on a Saturday night. Hey!
They say write what you know, and Maya Angelou had plenty to draw on, most of it come by the hard way. Raised by her grandmother in the Jim Crow South, she was raped by her mother's boyfriend when still a child. It shocked her into a silence that lasted 5 years, during which she read and read.
I remember never believing that whites were really real. White folks couldn't be people because their feet were too small, their skin too white and see-through-y.
She was a singer and dancer and toured Europe in Porgy and Bess. She had a spell as a journalist, and then came the volumes of autobiography which made her name, telling a story America had hardly heard before. By the 90s, Maya Angelou's work was heard in the most august places, a presidential inauguration.
History, despite its wrenching pain, cannot be unlived, but if faced with courage, need not be lived again.
Maya Angelou once told our own Jeremy Paxman how she'd overcome her fear of death.
The fear of death visited me. So real, so palpable. At a couple of times in my late teens and early 20s. And then somehow I lived through it and came to the condition of admitting that I will die. Admitting that is incredible because it liberates one.
Firstly, to you, Tayari Jones, explain her significance, particularly to African Americans.
You know, Maya Angelou wrote her famous memoir, I Know Why the Cage Bird Sings, in 1969. And keep in mind that in 1945, Richard Wright had written Black Boy, which was said to be kind of the definitive black Southern coming of age during Jim Crow. And 15 years later comes this amazing memoir, I Know Why the Cage Bird Sings, that is a woman's story. And her story was told in a way, in the intro it said, a story that America hadn't heard. I think for African Americans, in many ways, it was a story we had heard but had not yet read. And even with that, just the recognition of seeing oneself in print, she broke such a taboo in writing about her rape. Now, lots of people write memoirs and they talk about rape and sexual violence, but in 1969, she really broke ground. She opened the door so wide that younger writers like me don't even know necessarily that there was once a door there. And I think that's what happens when trailblazers do their work well. We forget that there was ever a block there. And I think that is one of the real significances of her legacy, but there are many.
One of the big significances, of course, is her role in the civil rights campaign. I mean, it wasn't just her writing about her own life, but her political role.
I mean, absolutely. I mean, she was good friends with Martin Luther King, with Malcolm X. She was involved with the Southern Leadership Christian SCLC Council. And she wrote, but she lived a life that was interested in transformation. She was a true citizen of the world. You know, she lived in Cairo, she lived in Ghana. I think that her experiences growing up in the Jim Crow South made her curious about a larger world. But she wasn't in exile. You know, the way Baldwin and some of the others were in exile when they were abroad. She, I felt, was just widening her community, bringing others into the fold, all of which enriched her writing.
And Ben O'Cree, in terms of her writing, she wasn't universally popular with all authors, but what do you make of what she achieved as a literary figure?
I think she achieved something very significant, as you heard Tiara say. She didn't invent the bearing witness memoir, but she certainly transformed it. She enriched it. She wrote a very lyrical, understated prose that reflected very, very carefully, minutely, the details of African American life in the early part of the 20th century. She wrote carefully, she wrote with passion, and her particular territory is the territory of the memoir, of the autobiographical writing, which is a very powerful tradition in African American writing, by the way.
And what does that mean to you? I mean, that's an area that you've played with very much in your own writing. What did she mean to your writing?
Well, to many of us throughout Africa and in England, she was a very inspiring figure because she spoke very eloquently about survival under very difficult circumstances, survival with grace, survival with forgiveness, survival with understanding. She constantly reached across in her writing and as a person to different communities. I remember once a very beautiful reading she gave where she was talking about the love poetry of Langston Hughes. So she was very concerned about bridging the gap across genders. And I think many people that I spoke to today called me up, left messages on my cell phone, just saying how deeply touched they were at her passing. So I think she meant a lot to individuals who were aware of the difficulty of life, and she transfigured this in her writing.